What's up YouTube? Welcome back to Tay TV. In my video I will be reacting to South African trophy hunter messes with the wrong lion. Let's get into this video.
The perfect killing machines. When you think of a pride of lions, nowhere do you think of a single man being able to take down a single lion, let alone a pride. Some individuals pride themselves in the prospect of hunting down certain animals, skinning them, and creating trophies for their experiences. Our first story concerns Boris Eugen, a trophy hunter that was quite active in the 60s, when trophy hunting was still considered a somewhat honorable activity. He spent years roaming the world and hunting various animals with his tight-knit group of fellow hunters. But the incident that would end his hunting career for good happened on June 8, 1968, when he crossed paths with the wrong lions. On June 8, Boris and his friends met up with jeeps near the Mozambique border, leading into Kruger National Park, a game reserve established in 1926 and the largest national park in Africa. The group consisted of 4 seasoned hunters who were all excited about the prospect of a new hunt. After exchanging some banter, they set out into the reserve to look for lone lions, or lions in lower numbers, to reduce the risk. It took them a couple of hours to find a pride in the distance, but they decided to stop and eat before continuing. The lions in the area were familiar with humans, so they didn't usually run away or approach them. However, today was different, as these humans had entirely different intentions. It was the afternoon at that point, and they were looking to complete the hunt as soon as possible, so they would have time to get back to the reserve's border. Boris was the first out of the jeeps and the first to move forward and aim at one of the lions. He steadied himself and took a shot from about 100 yards away.
100 yards.
It struck true,
Damn.
so you could see the male lion stagger in its steps as it ran away with the rest of the pride. They pursued them for a few miles in their jeeps, and they eventually found the male lion surrounded by the lionesses. By the accounts of the men that were there, they did not attempt to attack the hunters, but remained in a tight group, keeping their eyes fixed on them. Thinking that the lions had given up, Boris jumped out of the jeeps in a charismatic show of bravado, daring to step even closer to the lions, which were still not
You're
moving.
not supposed to
He
do
urged
that.
his friends to come with him to get up close and personal for the final blow, but no one dared to
Let's
step
just
out
go away as
on
quick as
account of the
possible.
lioness's gaze. Despite the others telling him to wait, Boris continued to flaunt his rifle skills and move forward, stopping no more than 5 yards away from the beast, shouldering his rifle again and aiming for the large male lion. After firing the rifle, he saw the male lion drop dead on the spot, and almost instantaneously, the 3 lionesses bolted to their feet and toward Boris, who was far too close to them by that point to get away safely. An account of one of the hunters could only vaguely describe the screams that Boris produced when they started biting into him, as the memory was far too haunting to talk about too much. Another man described the incident as a few moments where they could only watch in horror as the lions mauled their friend. After a minute, when they regained their composure, the remaining hunters opened fire on the 3 lions, killing them after a few shots. They slumped onto the ground, and the men jumped out to help Boris, who was whimpering. Although the attack did not last that long, Boris's condition could not have been worse. His legs were torn by their claws, large chunks were taken out of his body, and he was essentially scalped. His breathing was shallow, and the crew feared moving him because of the blood loss and the fact that it led to horrible screaming wherever they touched him. Eventually, they managed to haul him into one of the jeeps and sped back.
You gotta
in the
be
direction
very
that
careful
came
while
from.
you're going out hunting,
The
especially
drive was
with
shorter than
lions.
when they arrived, and they rushed to the only clinic they knew of in the area. As they got closer and closer, one of the hunters told the driver to stop the jeep. They stopped, and the hunter told the others that Boris was not breathing anymore. They discussed what they had to do from there and concluded that they should go to the clinic anyway to ask for advice. They arrived about 30 minutes later and the clinic staff gave directions to a center where they could take their friend. After receiving his possessions, one of them took notice of his travel flask, which was empty. Then they realized that his sudden onset of bravery was provided by a large amount of alcohol in his system. They made all the
Can't
necessary
drink, especially while you're out
and
there
Boris was flown back to his family
in nature
in
like that, too.
Vladivostok, Russia. The rest of them organized their own flights by themselves after mourning the loss of their friend, and their hunting trips were not as common as before. They only met in Thailand once for the rest of their hunting careers. Story 2.
It's the second story.
Although hunters tend to be quite brutal and directly provoke lions, resulting in grave injuries and even death,
Look at that
there are
lion,
some
man.
cases of people interacting with lions raised by them since birth.
How do we still know so little about the ocean?
How does she still have cable when Hulu plus Live TV has over 80?
Only for things to get bloody quickly. The next story is about Nathaniel Moore, an Australian zookeeper working in an undisclosed zoo in Australia, who led a school viewing party through the zoo in 1981, only to be brutally mauled by his most trusted lion. Nathaniel's career started in
Trusted lion,
1962 when he got a job at this particular zoo, initially as a cleaner, but over the years he moved up to the title of a zookeeper and even helped a lioness get through a difficult birthing period with the other zookeepers, which yielded 2 lion cubs, Ayali and Morty. Morty was the male of the pair, and it was Nathaniel's job to take care of him, which included feeding, grooming, moving, and more. Over the years, Morty grew to be one of the largest lions the zoo had ever seen, and he had an unbreakable bond with Nathaniel, leading to the pair becoming an attraction to visiting tourists. On March 16, 1981, a school visiting the zoo from Perth had a field trip consisting of 5 classes of students eager to check out all the sights the zoo had to offer. The group first moved from the reptile exhibit to the tropical birds, and finally moved from the polar animals to the African exhibit. Nathaniel was waiting for them there, and enthusiastically welcomed them as they approached the lion display. He waved a bucket and asked them what they thought it was. Some of them guessed meat, which was correct. Nathaniel always had an upbeat personality, which students always loved, because the viewings never felt like lectures, but more like interactive classes that were fun and informative. Nathaniel started with a short introduction, talking about Ayali and Morty, who were both in the enclosure and were simply lounging around, not paying attention to anything as they usually did. Ayali was a fairly large lion, but Morty was another beast. When he finished their story, he then grabbed the bucket and opened the door of the enclosure, which was a plexiglass door built into the entire plexiglass wall. Some of the students asked him why he would go inside and why he wouldn't just toss the food inside. And he said that he was best friends with the lions and that they would never harm him. When he got inside, Ayali immediately perked up and started walking toward Nathaniel, who showed no signs of fear at all. The students started to panic, thinking the beast was about to attack him, but all it did was get on its hind legs and rest its weight on Nathaniel's shoulders, licking his face gently. Ayali then got back on the ground and brushed against his legs, waiting for her food. He reached inside the bucket and threw a large bloody leg of some animal in the corner of the enclosure, after which Ayali ran for it and laid down to eat.
Okay.
Nathaniel looked back at the students, who were thoroughly amazed by the spectacle. Morty was in the back of the enclosure, laying down and looking at Nathaniel. He commented on Morty being grumpy and tossed him his food, which she ate. As Ayali was eating her food, Nathaniel sat beside her, patting her on her side. She was completely unbothered, and he talked about their friendly nature being in captivity. Morty was standing up at this point, still looking at the zookeeper. Just as Nathaniel was getting into another explanation of Ayali's nature, the entire group of students started screaming and pointing behind him. As he turned to look at what they were so afraid of, he was knocked on his stomach by the massive lion. He quickly put his hands on the nape of his neck, and Morty growled very loudly as he bit into Nathaniel's hands, breaking his bones. He screamed as the lion continued to maul him, scratching into him with its claws and biting into his shoulder. The class watching this unfold scattered and ran with their teachers to get Nathaniel some help, but some stood in place, either out of fear or curiosity. Just as they thought that Nathaniel would not make it through the lion's attack, Ayali sprang up and attacked Morty, growling even louder and defending Nathaniel with intense ferocity, driving the much larger lion into the corner as they fought. The other zookeepers came to Nathaniel's aid and quickly rushed in. Morty attempted to move past Ayali, but she did not let him. The zookeepers managed to pull Nathaniel out, leaving a trail of blood behind them. He moaned the entire way out of the enclosure, but managed to settle as he realized he was in no more danger. Medical professionals at the zoo rushed to his aid and managed to stop his bleeding using a simple tourniquet. Despite the severity of his wounds, Nathaniel was completely conscious and focused all his attention on the children, trying to ensure they were all right. They brought a stretcher and took Nathaniel away, while he tried his best to force a smile to assure the kids that everything was all right.
Gotta be very careful, especially when
After a few
dealing
weeks
with
at home,
animals
he recovered
like that.
from his wounds, but the good news ends there. Because of the attack, Morty had to be taken away to an African reserve to live out his days, as the stress of living in a zoo kept building and building until that unfortunate incident unfurled as it did. Ayali was allowed to stay in the zoo, and Nathaniel eventually returned to work and continued to tend to her. Story 3.
Story 3.
From the
Meet Philo TV, the $25 a month way to bring friends and family together with 70 plus channels of live and on-demand TV.
relatively safe confines of zoos, we now come back to an incident that changed one woman's life for the worst, when a lion suddenly decided to attack during a safari trip in Africa. Linda Daniels was a lawyer from America who decided to take an extended vacation with her husband to Kenya, more specifically to the Masai Mara Nature Reserve, to book a safari expedition among the other things they set out to do. Their vacation started on August 25, 2015, when Linda and James's flight landed in Nairobi, and they were free to enjoy the city for a few days, taking in the sights and just enjoying themselves, free from the constraints of their lives back home. After a few days, they took a short trip to the Masai Mara Reserve, where a guide was waiting alongside a large group of people. They commented on the size of the party and stated that they hadn't had one of that size in a few years, and were excited to take them along. There were 3 guides.
Gotta be very careful when you're going out to see lions, because you never know what can happen. You gotta always be prepared for the worst. Gotta be very careful.
That section of the reserve. After about 30 minutes of driving, they could finally see the small pride of lions in the distance. They pulled up slowly with the jeeps, and the guide started their speech about the value of those animals to the food chain of Africa in its entirety. The lions were close to the central station of the reserve and were quite used to people around them, and very rarely did the guides have anything to worry about when they were there. Linda and James were talking about how beautiful the beasts were. All in all, about 10 of them were there, including their cubs. The pride mostly consisted of lionesses. Some even dared to lie beside the jeeps in their shade. The tourists loved this and were enthralled watching the lions in their natural habitat. Linda was mesmerized by the sight and relaxed as she looked at the beast.
Look at the lions.
The problem started when she absent-mindedly let her arms slip through the rails of the jeep to hang on the outside. She continued to talk with her husband, but her sentence was cut short as James saw his wife's head hit the side of the jeep as something pulled her arm back. She immediately lost consciousness, and James jumped up, screaming for help. He looked to the side of the Jeep and spotted a lioness with its jaws clamped down on Linda's arm, pulling it out of her shoulder socket. He followed the panicked guide as he jumped out of the Jeep and approached the lion with a big stick, yelling at it to let go. It kept growling, but immediately let go when the guide hit it on the head. The lioness ran off to the rest of her pride, and the guide immediately started tending to Linda's arm, as James also came to the side of the Jeep. The
Man,
arm was
these
oozing
stories,
blood,
man,
and the
it's
portions where the
scary.
lion's teeth
Really
peeled her
is.
skin away, and some visible bones and tendons stuck out. The shoulder joint was completely dislocated, so they had difficulty getting her arm back through the rails, but they managed it after a few minutes. The other guys calmed down the party, informed them that they would be leaving earlier due to what happened.
Gotta be very
and helped James
careful.
bandage
Very.
Linda's arm up. The bleeding was minimized, but they could do nothing about her shoulder. After about 15 minutes of driving, Linda regained consciousness in James's arms and started screaming as the pain returned to her. He managed to calm her down, as the pain was mostly localized to one part of her arm and shoulder. But when she realized she was okay, the screaming was reduced to teary whimpers. They arrived at the reserve after another 10 minutes of rush driving, and she was immediately taken to the local
Glass
clinic
made it to
where
the
her wounds
hospital
were tended
safe.
to. In the end, the doctors confirmed that she would fully recover, but there would be heavy scarring, and she would experience neck pains whenever the weather changed. They ended up returning to their home in New York 3 days later. Story 4. Our final story concerns a construction worker called Mario Banda, who was working on the
Mario
Kenya-Uganda
Banda.
Railway in 1992 when he encountered one of the most dangerous predators at work one day. Mario left for work on July 2nd, 1992, in the very early morning, as there was a lot to do, and he agreed to meet a friend on the way there to discuss some business. After getting some coffee in a local bar, he concluded his meeting at 6:30 a.m. and was off for the railway, about a 20-minute drive away. His colleagues were waiting for him there already, and as he showed up, they started with their work for the day. The day toiled on and on for hours, with few breaks taken the entire time. Mario enjoyed his work and tended to get lost in conversation with his colleagues, so the arduous labor was lessened to an extent. But that did not mean that it would not stretch out into the late hours of the night, as it usually did. As the day ended, Mario and the rest of the workers stuck around to sit and talk at around 10 p.m. They started to leave, but Mario remembered that he left some equipment over from the previous day, which he had to load into his car. Some offered to stay around and help, but he didn't need any. As the last cars cleared, Mario started picking up some pickaxes, drills, and other construction implements. As he bent down to pick up the
Someone sits down next to you in a 5-hour flight, your worst nightmare is that they're wearing
Axe body spray.
Oh, Axe.
the last gear, he heard a deep, shuddering sound directly in front of him. It was dark and hard to see, but a very large shape lumbered in front of the light from his car, and he froze in his tracks as he realized what it was. It was a full-grown lioness.
Whoa,
The beast
whoa.
stared directly at him, lowered in a threatening stance and growling intently.
Whoa.
Mario had no idea what he should have done, as he had never encountered a lion before. He also had no reason to even expect the lion to be there in the first place. He was frozen in fear. Only when the lion started charging at him did his flight response kick in, and he made a mad dash for his car. The lion was approximately 10 yards away from him then, but it took a second to catch up to him. They both came hurtling to the ground and tumbling in the dust of the work site. The lioness dug its claws into Mario's back as it tried to stay locked onto him, growling the entire time. Marrero could only
Damn,
remember
gotta
being
be
blinded by
careful.
the dust that was kicked up in the tumble, but he could faintly see his car a few yards away, so that was the end goal. However, there was nothing he could do against the frightening weight on his back. So all he could do was scream, curl up into a fetal position, and hope for the best. The lion's teeth sunk into his back as it thrashed around, trying to tear flesh out of Marrero for its meal. He was a strong man, but the sheer weight of the beast was staggering. He moved his hands away from his neck and tried to crawl away in utter desperation, to which the lion only yielded for about a yard, but it immediately returned to the mauling. His nails broke and chipped as he tried to grasp anything effectively, and to his relief, he managed to find a large metal bar. The one he dropped into his car when he spotted the lion for the first time.
Perfect.
With everything he had in him, he gripped the bar and swung behind himself with everything he had, striking the lion directly on the snout. It was staggered. He later recalled that the chances of that happening were 1 in a million, and that he could not replicate that if he tried. When the bar found its mark, that moment gave him a few precious seconds to scramble for his car, which was right next to him and the lion. He latched onto the door's handle and pulled it open, throwing himself inside. He screamed as his wounded back came into contact with the seat, but he managed to swing the door closed just as
Glad he
the
made it
lion
out alive.
recovered
It's
and
most
came back,
important.
clawing at the window and growling loudly. Through pure adrenaline, Marrero ignored the pain and set himself in the driver's seat, turning his car on and flooring it to escape the scene. He never slowed down and ignored all the street signs
Made it out.
to get to the nearest hospital. But
These
also
stores got
warned
me
his
like,
colleagues,
got his
as some
very
of them
careful.
could have returned to the site in the night. as
This
they
is it for this
sometimes
video.
did.
Stay
In
tuned
time, he reached
for my
his
next
town
video.
hospital, where he was admitted and his wounds were treated. His wife and colleagues came to his side immediately, and he explained what happened. There was not much permanent damage, and he returned to work a month later. The company he worked for